And so now there's these ladies that walk around with a stack of tarantulas on a tray 2 feet high, and there's hundreds of them, and they fry them, and they taste like what do you call it? A soft shell crab. Okay, texture of a soft shell crab, but it's a freaking tarantula.
Yeah. You're
And it was something more of a novelty that it wasn't because I was hungry or because it tasted good. That's for sure.
you're like this because it's a
Yeah.
tarantula. Welcome to another episode of World Travel Made Easy with Itinerary Boss. And for this week's episode, I'm excited to have on Ralph Velasco. I got the chance to connect with Ralph when he actually was in Spain, and he's originally from Chicago, and he'll give you his background of his whole travel life. But this episode, we really want to dive into what does it mean to be a mindful traveler and going deep, not wide. So wanted to bring Ralph on. How's it going, Ralph?
Great. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, thanks for coming on. And I don't want to sell you short, so would love to just hear a little bit more about your background and your area of expertise in the travel industry.
Sure. So since 2008, I've been a professional travel photographer and international tour organizer. And I've organized and led over 120 international trips around the world, everywhere from Antarctica to Cuba, India, all over Asia, Northern Africa, Europe. And so I organize and lead small group trips. They're anywhere from 6 to 10 people typically, depends on the trip. They're multi-week trips as well. All of them are international. I do a few domestic trips here in the US nowadays, which I started out doing all domestic, but now they're pretty much all international. And so something I've been doing now for 16 years full time, and it's been pretty great. As you can imagine, just setting up these trips and sharing the world with people, which is what I love to do.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And I think when we first talked, we connected just around group travel. And if I'm not mistaken, you're going on these trips and leading everyone when you do it, correct?
That's right. I lead pretty much every trip. There's a few that, depending on the amount of people, I could still send people, and they'll have a great time, but I may not be a part of the trip. So Antarctica tends to be like that, where, if I don't get quite enough people, I could still, the clients can still go and have a wonderful trip. I just wouldn't be there, but that's rare.
Gotcha. No, that's really cool. And I think that's something I love about group travel is being able to see when you're there, seeing the excitement on people's faces, and really the impact you're making. So that's cool. And it's always good to connect with people who are experts in that area. Would love to hear a little bit more. You started in 2008 that business, but what got you started traveling to then take that leap and then start a travel business?
I've been traveling since I was, say, 15, when in high school I studied in Spain for a summer. And the next year I was a volunteer in Peru. The next year I was a volunteer in Venezuela. And the following summer I was a student in Mexico City. So most of my travels have been in Hispanic countries where they speak Spanish, and where it helped me to learn Spanish over the years, especially in my formative years. Um, but yeah, so that got me hooked on travel. Uh, and that first Spain trip got me hooked on Europe and Spain specifically, which is still one of my favorite countries. And so I had always wanted to figure out a way to make a living from travel and photography. But back when I started, in the late 70s, early 80s, this was before the internet and Wi-Fi and phones and, everything, practically before the wheel. And so it's a very different way to travel back then. And of course, we didn't know what we were missing. I mean, when I was 24, I sold my first restaurant. This was back in 1987, 88, and I did a round the world trip. I said, before I do anything else, I want to take around the world trips. I bought a round the world ticket back then, and I traveled for 5 months to 15 some different countries by myself. And that's back, like I said, before the internet, where you could just get information online, social media, all that stuff. Back then, you had to send away for brochures, remember those? And actually call someone in the country or the travel department, whatever, to get information about where to go, where to stay, or you just figured it out when you got there. So it was quite different, but good
Yeah,
memories.
yeah, seriously. I mean, that's a journey, and I mean, it's now it seemed just thinking about that. I mean, now you can go on your phone and you're like, okay, I want to go to Spain, and within seconds you can find out, okay, where are the different places that you could fly into? Where, if you want to go to the northern part, where is good to go? If you want to go to the south, so that's so now it's pretty much for you. I feel like it's a cakewalk when you're helping plan some of these trips, and you've been to most of the places that you're going. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I always think, I've done like Cuba, I've done 19 times now.
Oh wow, okay.
And you would think that it would just get easier and easier every time, but it's not quite that easy because I'm always changing things and trying to make things better. So part of it's my own doing that, I'm constantly wanting to tweak things and, make the trip that much better, where I could maybe rest on my laurels a little bit, but I don't want to do that.
Yeah,
I always want to make these trips better. And so there's always work to do. There's never just that cookie cutter.
yeah.
Okay, we're just going to do exactly what we did last year. No,
That
it almost never works that way.
Yeah, right. And that's pretty funny because I had on an earlier episode, I had my study abroad professor who took a group of 30 college students over to Ireland for a Maymester for about 3 weeks when I was a junior in college. But every year he did it for 17 years. The first year he started out, he went to China. The first day he met everyone was when they got to the airport. So he was going over to China with about, I don't know, 40 people that he didn't know. So he was like, that was just crazy. One, because,
Mm.
and then from there, he's like, got the program going, started that, and then started going to Ireland and Australia every year, flip flopping each Maymaster. But he was like, when you guys would go out to the bars, I would go walk the streets, meet the local owners of the restaurants, right? Like map out our routes. And if I did something that I wanted to improve on last year, I just continued to improve that. And each year got better and better and better. So no, I love that mindset.
Yeah, that's funny.
Yeah. Yeah. He said he would sometimes at night he would go up and just hang out and talk to the homeless and understand more of what was going on with in in the city. But yeah, I know when we were talking and you mentioned you sold a restaurant and you're big into experiences, food, and one of the biggest things that I like when I travel, and I know when we were talking, you said is local experiences, local restaurants, right? Finding some of those hidden gems. It would be great just to understand, you know, why is that one of your favorite things to do?
Well, yeah, the reason I travel, and I think probably the most people do, is to get away from the familiar. And so I don't want to go somewhere that's too familiar to me back at home, because why should I even leave then? So I like to go and meet the people, learn a little bit of the language if possible, but learn about these different perspectives on life that all these people from around the world have. We live in quite a bubble here in the US where, we tend to think that everything we do is right or the best, and it's just not the case. Um, it's one thing to be nationalistic and, everyone thinks that their country's the best and their flag is the best and everything. But we can learn from everyone. And so I love that. I love to go talk to small business owners, craftsmen and women, um, people that own restaurants, and just get down to, the street level and learn about people and what their perspectives are. Because I always come back a better person from travel because I've been exposed to these other things and gotten out of that comfort zone. So
Yeah.
to me, it's really, really important.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that's one of the most important things, and not just going and saying, "Oh, I'm going to go do all the tourist things that I saw on social media." It's really spending that time, not going overseas and then eating at the chain. I mean, if you want to try McDonald's to see what the difference is between food over in Europe, where they're not, just pumping it with all the bad ingredients, right? I think that's something too that you learn when you go over to those places is eat a meal there, eat a meal here, and you'll feel completely different, right? So I think that's that's one of my favorite parts of going. And when I come back, I'm like, oh great, I might gain some weight, or I gotta figure out how I can eat healthier.
I was just talking to my mother, and she was preparing a roasted chicken that you get at Costco or Sam's Club.
Yeah.
Those 4.99 for these huge chickens,
Yeah.
and they're beautiful. I mean, they're just big and juicy, and $5. I mean, how could you beat it? And I was telling her that I was in France at a local market, and the chickens were half the size. And they weren't $5, they were the equivalent of like $17 for
Hmm.
half the size, if that. But, it wasn't just pumped with God knows what that we do here to make that thing look like it's so huge and beautiful. And they are tasty, but you wonder about the difference in the health aspects of it, but the cost was really surprising because typically things are less expensive in
Hmm.
Europe, depending on what you're after. But I couldn't believe the price of it. Obviously, those are a loss leader for Costco and
Yeah.
Sam's Club to get you to come in, which definitely brings me in. But just the difference between the size and I wonder what's really inside that chicken.
Right. You got the Jose Canseco of chickens.
No
they're
doubt.
just they're
Exactly.
they're just roiding it up.
No doubt.
But no, that's yeah, that's one of our favorite parts is just going, trying the different foods. I think that's something that I mean, just having different guests like yourself on is when you do go places, we've definitely started to focus on eating at local, and people who have been there, small business owners. But I think also just talking to them, understanding their story, the why, it just does give you such a different perspective on that.
Yeah, and having come from a food service background, which I do, I mentioned I've owned a couple restaurants. My family, I grew up in the restaurant industry. My grandparents had a restaurant. So, and food is just such a big part of travel. I mean, it's something that we all do. We've got to eat every day. So making food a big part of my trips is really important to me because of my food service background. I guess I consider myself a little bit of a foodie, but I just enjoy trying new things and seeing how they buy it, how they prepare it, how they make it, how they serve it, how do you eat it.
Hmm.
It's such a big part of travel that and it's part of my background that I try to make that a big part of my trips because food is like that common thread that we all have,
Hmm.
and to learn about it from other people is really interesting.
Yeah, and I bet when you're planning and going on some of these trips, you probably have people who either have maybe they've been out of the country, but maybe they haven't been to that region and they're trying some of this food for the first time. And you're getting to kind of see with your background in the restaurant industry and your passion for it and being a foodie, you get to see what impact that has on them if they're like I mean whenever we travel I'm like okay let's try whatever like whatever the dishes of the region if there's anything crazy like we might as well it's not like we're gonna do it at home so you get to see people outside their comfort zone and I bet that's pretty cool to see and they probably get some pretty good experiences through that.
Yeah, no doubt. And I love markets because they're colorful. There's, a lot of action going on. There's, transactions and people, you get the locals there. Some of them are more touristy than other ones, but I like to have a local chef take us on a market walk. Again, teaching us, what to look for, how to buy something, how to prepare it, et cetera, how to actually eat it. But I'm one of those people, I'll try anything twice.
Yeah.
From tarantulas in Cambodia to putrefied shark in Iceland. I mean, I'll try it. And more often than not, it's great. And you probably heard of durian, the
Uh-huh.
fruit. Yeah, it's got this terrible smell and texture and everything, but it's something that people absolutely love, especially in Southeast Asia.
Okay.
And when you try it, yeah, it's got a strange texture and mouthfeel to it, but it's very tasty and nothing like it smells, which
Okay.
is really kind of freaks the brain out a little bit. So I like those kinds of things and to try those things and to get my people to try them.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a particular fruit that I absolutely love, like jackfruit. It's not something that we encounter much here in the US, but man, is it good. And I want to turn people on to
Yeah.
that. Whether it's an experience or a food or activity or something, I want to turn my people on to that and say, God, how great is this?
Right. And they're doing it outside of their comfort zone. Is that dish, when you say Southeast Asia, do they have that in like Thailand, Indonesia? Okay.
Jackfruit. Yeah, it's a big fruit. It looks like a durian.
Okay.
Durian, though, has like a real spiky skin to it, and the jackfruit is more smooth, but they can be huge, big, like weigh 60 pounds.
Okay.
But then you have to get inside them to get the good stuff. And
Okay.
they're a pain in the ass to open up and prepare and eat and everything, but so good.
I'm
So
gonna
good.
have to mark that down for when we go to Thailand and Bali in April,
Absolutely. You'll
and
find it there, no
I'll
doubt.
have to get a picture and shoot it your way.
Absolutely. It's the best. Jackfruit is so good. And so is durian.
All right, I'm looking forward to it. I want to ask because that's tarantula. I've never heard, no one's ever told me when we were in Costa Rica this past February, did a little 10-day remote work trip, and we went to Monteverde in the cloud forest and did the cloud forest tour, and we saw one. But how does that taste? How do they get, like, how do they prepare that and all that?
You weren't hungry, apparently, huh?
No,
You weren't
no,
that hungry.
I wasn't grabbing it with my hand.
Yeah, no, it's something that a friend of mine who first took me to turn me on to Cambodia, he told me about the tarantulas, and there's restaurants that specialize in it. And it's something that's left over from the Khmer, the war from the 70s when they didn't have much to eat and they were eating anything that they could. And so bugs and, protein like that was something that they were definitely, you know, cultivating. And so now there's these ladies that walk around with a stack of tarantulas on a tray 2 feet high, and there's just hundreds of them, and they fry them, and they taste like what do you call it? A soft shell crab, kind of like it's got the
Okay.
like the texture of a soft shell crab, but it's a freaking tarantula.
Yeah.
And
You're
it was something more of a novelty that it wasn't because I was hungry or because it tasted good. That's for sure.
you're like, I'm just trying this because it's a
Yeah,
tarantula. I have
yeah.
to. Okay. Interesting. And then you said you've been to Cuba 19 times. Is that why do you keep going back there? Why do you keep choosing that as a destination?
Yeah, it's a wonderful place that I've really enjoyed over the years. Been going since 2010. It became a specialty for me. My most popular trip. It's a place that people can't just, or at least Americans can't just jump on an airplane and fly down there. People from the U.S. So it's a place that you kind of have to go with someone like me or a company that can get set up the paperwork.
Okay.
And for U.S. citizens, because we have a boycott with Cuba, you need special paperwork. and we handle all of that. So it's one of those trips that I kind of became known for. And then I
Gotcha.
didn't go for about 6 years, and I just went this year for the first time in 6 years. And so it's a trip that I'm bringing back, and people are wonderful. The food is good. It's not great, it's good because they have trouble getting the ingredients and
Okay.
the basic ingredients, spices and things like that. But it's just a wonderful country, it's just 90 miles away from the
Hmm.
southern tip of the U.S., but it's another world, and
Yeah.
so it's a really wonderful place.
Interesting. Okay. I wasn't aware of that, but for the listeners, if you want to go to Cuba right there, that's Ralph's your guy. Hit
Yeah,
him up and he can help you. Going 19 times, I would definitely trust you getting the
yeah,
paperwork done and getting me there.
yeah. I've got two more trips coming up this spring, February and April,
Okay.
and still have some spaces on those trips if people are interested. Yeah,
Okay. Nice. We'll be in Key West first weekend of May. And I remember seeing the southmost point and looking out, and it's like you're 90 miles from Cuba. And I thought
yeah,
you could just get a direct flight.
yeah. You can from Miami, but yeah, it's not legal just to show up.
Gotcha. Good to know. And then you mentioned Antarctica. I'd had a former guest who I think we talked about this, but similarly, him and his wife actually they both um, uh, quit their jobs and were just like, hey, before we have kids, we want to do a round the world trip. They did 6 months. I think they went to 40 countries. So they like did shorter stints. Yeah. But they did Antarctica. That was like one of the last minute trips that got added to the itinerary because someone had to back out and they were like, we're getting these tickets for like 50% off. We're going to go.
Yeah.
Um, why? Like, obviously, it's hard to get to. It's all, all the things that you think of, but why specifically do you plan trips and go there?
Well, it was a trip that I just started doing last year in 2023. It's one that I place that I'd wanted to go for a long time. I mean, it's the seventh continent. It's they say that something like 0.005% of the world's population has even been to Antarctica. And it's a place that I'd always wanted to go, and I'm a sailor, but I had no interest in sailing across the Drake Passage to get there, which even though you're on a big ship, can take 2.5 days each way, and it can be extremely rough. So there's three oceans that come together there. They create these huge waves. I had one client on my last trip that I just did in February, and it was a second attempt to get down there because on his first attempt, someone on his ship died.
Oh, wow.
He had been thrown against. He must have been walking down one of the ship's hallways and got thrown against the side of from a rogue wave or something. And I think he got a head injury. So they never actually got to Antarctica. So he wanted to do it again. So he came on this trip. And so those are the kinds of things that happen. I had another client that's been with me to Cuba, actually. And she went to Antarctica, and her roommate broke her arm because she got thrown off the bed, on a
Gee.
big wave, and she got hurt doing something else. But so, to make a long story longer, I finally found this company that flies down.
Okay.
And so they fly from Punta Arenas, Chile to the continent in less than 2 hours. You get on the ship down there, you're there for 5 days. It's the smallest ship in the industry. It's a 67 passenger former icebreaker from Greenland. So it's a well qualified
Yeah.
ship, and it's big. I mean, you can't believe that only 65 people are on the ship, but it's absolutely beautiful. And it allows you to get into smaller ports, bays,
Yeah.
things like that to see things that the bigger ships can't do. The bigger ships can't even let people off sometimes because only 100 people are allowed at any one landing point. Only 100
Gotcha.
people can get off at any one landing point. That's a treaty, that's agreement that they have down there. So if you're on a huge ship, which there are big ships down there, either you go and you just wave at the shore, or you have to get off in stages, or they let people off and they have to come back and get everyone back. So this was the way that I wanted to go. Fly down there, you're there in less than 2 hours. It's on a proper airplane with like 3 and 3 seats, 75 or so passengers, flight attendants,
Yeah.
lunch, everything.
Nice.
And then you get on the ship and you're there for 5 nights on the ship. You get to go into all these smaller little bays and everything because the other ships can't get there. I don't think we saw another ship in 5 days, and it was fantastic. But you realize how off the beaten path you are, how remote you are, because of the just the silence. That's something
Hmm.
that really affected me, was the sound of silence, and the wildlife, and the fact that you don't see another man-made object anywhere.
That's
Antennas, fences, nothing.
that's
Yeah,
cool. That is, I did
really.
not know that. I knew you had the Kyle, my friend and guest who came on. He went through the Drake Passage and he was like, "Yeah, it was wavy." I didn't realize it was. I was thinking like, "Oh, you're deep sea fishing, seasick, wavy." And okay, that's good to know.
It
It's
depends. I mean, because it
yeah,
can be there. It's
yeah.
called the Drake Lake, where it's completely flat, or the Drake Shake,
Okay.
and you could get 100-foot waves.
Wow.
Now, they try to avoid that, but there's only so much you can do.
Yeah.
And so to me, to be able to fly down, I didn't feel like I was cheated or that I was cheating by flying
Hmm.
down. We fly everywhere.
Yeah.
And it was absolutely the best trip.
No, that sounds amazing. I'm intrigued now. How
Yeah, I mean, that's the way I was. I
yeah,
wanted to go
serious.
before, but when you think about having to do that, you're like, okay, maybe not.
Yeah, no, seriously. So from you're going from Chile, how do you fly? Is there a direct flight from Santiago or how does that work?
No, you go down to Punta Arenas, Chile, which is way south in
Okay.
Chile. And that's where you fly from there to the continent and back, and that's included in the ticket, and in the price for the trip. There's one night on either end of the trip in Punta Arenas, and then 5 nights in Antarctica, and then you come back for one night, and pretty much everything except one dinner's included.
Oh,
But you're
nice.
on the smallest ship in the industry with only 67 clients,
Yeah.
and maybe 15 or 20 crew. So it's got the smallest crew to client ratio in the industry. And like I
Gotcha.
said, you're getting into these really small places. You're able to get off almost everything's based on the weather, of course. But what I really liked about, and I realized later, was that also because it's such a small ship and beautiful, that it attracts the best people
Yeah.
in the industry, the best crew, the best expedition leaders, scientists, glaciologists, because every day there's 2 or 3 presentations that they give you too. So you're learning about the place while you're down there. Super interesting. Yeah.
Okay. That's very interesting. I'm guessing it runs a pretty hefty price since it's pretty exclusive.
Yeah, it's not inexpensive. And if people are comparing apples to apples, always compare apples to apples,
Yeah.
because you could probably get down there for $6,000 or $7,000. But it's going to be a shorter trip. It may be on a bigger boat.
Mhm.
You have to sail the Drake Passage. But with this trip, it's anywhere from about 13 to $15,000. But you do fly, 5 nights on the ship, smallest ship, all meals included, drinks. So there's a lot of reasons that it's more pricey, but well worth the splurge. And what an experience.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like it. I mean, you're paying one for convenience. You're getting to fly there, and then you're getting. I think the cool part is you're just there on the small ship and you're getting to go to remote places where you're not like, okay, I got to go down what we're talking about being mindful, right? Take a picture that I was in Antarctica, step on, and then get back on the ship.
Yeah.
You're getting to really enjoy that in yeah, the silence. I've done, we went heli skiing in Whistler a couple years back, and that was definitely the most silence where they drop you off and they leave and you're looking around and it's you and four other people and it's just you're in the thick of things and you're like, all right, well, this is untouched snow and it's
Yeah.
pretty cool, but it's kind of freaky the first time you get off. You're like, wow, I'm out here.
Yeah. You realize how remote you are.
Yeah, yeah, no, for sure. That's cool. That's definitely something I'm intrigued in. I did
It's
not
well
know
worth
that.
the splurge. And but again, don't if people are thinking about it, don't just compare pricing
Yeah.
because it's going to be a very different trip.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
100%.
So
Well, no, I
something
appreciate you
to
sharing that. And then I know when we were talking in when we first met, you were talking about just staying in an 11th century castle in France. That was I wanted to bring that up since that's another unique place. So I would love to hear a little bit more about that experience and, where is that and, how
remember.
can people get there and everything about it.
Yeah, so the last time we spoke was maybe a month ago, and I was in France and Spain for about 2.5 months on this last trip, and I brought a group to the castle. It's in the Dordogne region of France, which is sort of southwestern France. Beautiful, sort of a little bit off the beaten path. It's not something that you've heard of Provence and Normandy and all these big regions, but the Dordogne is pretty, it's remote, but it's gorgeous. There's a lot of little villages. But this castle is an 11th century castle, and it was purchased by a man about 35 years ago. And he's turned it into a place that he can bring groups to. And he contacted me out of the blue about 7, 8 years ago and said, "Hey, I own a castle here in southwestern France. We're starting to bring some groups here. I see that you do trips. Would you be interested in coming over and doing a scouting trip? And perhaps you could start bringing some groups here." And turns out his name is Miles Copeland. Have you ever heard of
I
that
have
name
not.
by chance?
No.
Well, his brother is Stuart Copeland, the drummer for the Police, the band
Okay.
The Police. And Miles uh, managed the Police and Sting through their heydays in the late 70s, early 80s. And so I'd heard of his name and I knew who he was because I'm a big 80s music fan, and turned out it was him. So this is the guy who had sold his record company in England, bought this castle, and for 35 years has been bringing groups there. And so he contacted me out of the blue and asked me if I wanted to come and check it out, which I did. And it was like, wow, this is fantastic.
Yeah.
I mean, you look up the word castle in the dictionary and there's a picture of this place
That's
pretty
cool.
much because it's just so classic. And it's got 270 acres of grounds. There's little hiking trails and absolutely stunning, stunning place. And then there's these little villages nearby. So we stay 7 nights at the castle, and then we do day trips. Every day we do a little hub and spoke, and we'll hit one or two villages. We do walnut and hazelnut oil tasting, caviar tasting. Um, Drink a lot of wine
There you
and
go.
go visit these beautiful small villages, restaurants. It's a really wonderful trip. But
Yeah.
those are kind of trips that I'm starting to. I've been creating sort of just before COVID and since COVID, is stay in one, maybe two locations instead of traveling throughout a whole country or region in
Hmm.
14 days, staying 2 nights in each place.
Yeah.
So that's where that travel deep, not wide idea comes in, and sort of how the Mindful and Intentional Traveler series came to be as well.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I think when I first started traveling, when I started planning group trips and doing that, we were in our 20s and it was how do we go see the cities? How do we do 2 or 3 days in each and see as much possible? But as you do it more, you realize I'd rather be somewhere if I'm going for 15, 16 days. I'd rather be somewhere. If we want to see a couple places, it may be 4 or 5 days. And if it's something that's nearby, do a day or two trip. But no,
Yeah.
that's cool. And I think it's valuable because you're going off the beaten path and you're curating some of these unique experiences that not when people think of travel, they think of the big cities, and you're not just, packed together with other tourists and taking pictures like you said, the whole mindfulness coming about. So yeah, would love to just hear a little bit more just about how that whole series came about. What do you think about when you think about mindfulness, and then just talk a little bit too about, I know it's a little bit of a loaded question, but just the going deep, not wide.
Yeah. So the initial kernel of this idea came back in 1980 when I was in Peru on that trip that I mentioned in high school, where I was a volunteer with 9 other boys from my high school. I went to an all boys high school back then. And we went down to Peru for, I think it was 6 or 7 weeks one summer. And we were going to be volunteers. We helped them put the roof on a school, the foundation for a medical center or something, just kind of manual labor. And a few, maybe a week or so into the trip, I remember us kind of sitting around and we were staying at some dorms at a high school in Lima that they let us stay at their dorms. And, we're 16-year-old boys. We're kind of moaning a little bit about missing our beds and our families and our, family, our mother's cooking and stuff like that. And so one of the priests that was leading the trip said, you know what, guys, you've got this incredible opportunity to be in this amazing place halfway around the world. Be here now. And those 3 words really stuck with me. And he just wanted to encourage us that we've got this opportunity to be in this other part of the world. Why are we like dreaming of being somewhere else? So, I've always had that in the back of my mind. And as the more I travel, and I've been traveling really hardcore for the past 16 years that I've been in this business, as you can imagine, and the older I get, the more I appreciate slow travel and not trying to see a little bit of everything, but rather doing a deep dive into a few things. And that again goes back to that staying in one, maybe two locations over the course of 7, 8, 12 days and doing a real deep dive into a place. And then doing the hub and spoke so that we get some variety, but we
Hmm.
always pack and unpack once, maybe twice. And and again, you feel like you're, more of a local than you are just touching in on these places. So I've really come to appreciate the idea of just sitting in a cafe and watching the world go by, sitting in a pub and having a drink with an old timer sitting next to me, learning about his life, sitting on a bar stool that's older than the United States of America, probably.
Yeah.
So I'm fascinated by those things. And so it also helps me because you're not constantly looking for that next sort of travel buzz. You're just satisfied with where you are.
Hmm.
And that's what mindfulness really is, if you ask me. It's about being present, being here now. The past is gone. The future never really comes. We can only be in the present. And so I think that's something that comes with age and just being a little wiser and more worldly, is coming to that realization and appreciation of, my mom's got this wonderful saying. I don't know where she got it, but it's funny. She says, "You're looking for the horse you're riding on." You're looking for something that's out, you're looking for something that's right here.
Yeah.
It's right there, but you're looking everywhere else for it. And I just think that's such the perfect, what do you call analogy for
Yeah.
that is you're looking for the horse that you're riding on. And so, as I said, the more I get older, the more I appreciate that idea of being more satisfied with what we have than
Hmm.
constantly looking for something else.
Yeah. No, well said. Just being in the present, and especially when you're somewhere else and you feel like you can unplug, and you should, when you are over there. I mean, it's good because, one, it makes you appreciate, like, wow, some of the small stuff, there's no reason to sweat it. And then two, you get to learn and just engulf yourself in that culture and see kind of how their day to day works, and just being present and learning from that. And one thing that we used to do, we went on group trips, we would play the phone game where it was like, all right, everyone put your phone in the middle of the table for this entire meal. If we're here 2 hours, like, sure, you can pick it up, but the first person who picks it up has to buy a round of drinks. So then it's like, well, I don't really want to buy a round of drinks, especially if you're if you're sitting down at an expensive restaurant. It works real well.
Yeah, yeah, that's a great idea. I love it. Yeah, because the first book I wrote was 101 Tips for Developing Your Photographic Eye and More. And I think as photographers, we're the worst at this
Hmm.
idea of being present because we go to these amazing places and we see the whole trip through the viewfinder of a camera.
Hmm.
And especially if you're on a hardcore like photo workshop, which I used to run workshops and then I started changing them to photo tours and then cultural tours with a focus on photography. And now kind of getting away from the photography part because it takes you away from
Hmm.
being present. Because all we want to do is take pictures and look through that viewfinder. And so I go to these amazing places and I wonder, was I really there?
Hmm.
Yeah, I've got the receipts, I've got the passport stamps, I've got the photographs and video, but was I, really mentally there? And I begin to, I started to realize how important that being there, being here, wherever that here is now, the importance and value of that.
Yeah, no,
Um,
yeah, I was gonna
excuse me.
ask. Yeah,
Go ahead.
how? No, I was gonna ask. I mean, you said I didn't even have to ask the question. Was, with your photography background, when you go, like, how do you stay present and not, oh, I need to take obviously pictures. If you're working, I feel like that's, you're there working. You're not there really vacationing and enjoying it. So now you answered the question I was gonna ask.
No, but yeah, the reason I brought up that book that I wrote is because the last tip in the book that I wrote, the 101 tip, is to put the camera down.
I love it.
And that should probably be the first tip in the book. It's okay, let's go out photographing with keeping in mind that we're going to put the camera down now and then. And that goes back to what you just mentioned about, everyone's putting their phones in the middle, they can't touch them, and if they do, first one's got to buy drinks. I do something where if you're late on any of my trips, you have to buy drinks.
Wow. Man, I
So,
would have drank for free my entire 20s. We had a guy in our group that we literally, it's called Nick Standard Time, because an hour late and we have everything. I mean, I got a lot of friends like that, but yeah, that would have, I wish I had that tip 10 years ago. I would
yeah.
have saved a lot of money and traveled a little bit more with that money.
Yeah, I mean, when you're with a group and it's not just a bunch of buddies or something,
Yeah.
you got to be considerate of everyone else. So I make that really clear up front because, you can't have someone on a trip that's an hour late for every meeting because
Yeah.
that's just going to be a real problem. So
Yeah.
I just get that out of the way right up front that if you're late, you buy drinks, and it almost never happens. It's a
That's
big
smart.
deterrent. Yeah.
That's smart. I'm using that on the rest of the trips that I go on.
Good,
That's
good.
or it just kind of in life. I love it. I love it. What
Yeah, and
about, oh, go ahead.
I was going to say that idea of putting the camera down though too, that's another thing is go out with out your smartphone with you or turn it off and put it deep into your backpacks somewhere where you can't just whip it out every time, you feel like checking your email or a text or something.
Mhm.
So that's really important is putting the camera down, absorbing the place with your mind's eye, with your other senses, taste, touch, feel, smell. Um, you know, we I should talk for myself. I go to these amazing places. And how many times I find myself, and I eat alone a lot because I'm either with a group or I'm by myself typically. So, what do? You don't want to kind of just sit there looking at your plate all the time, but so you break out your phone and, maybe you got your earphones in and you're listening to a podcast. And so, but you're missing out on the meal
Yeah.
and you're in this amazing place like I just was in Spain. And I don't want to miss out on those meals. I
Mhm.
want to enjoy them and savor them. So put that phone down, turn it off, put it away and really taste the food, smell the food, appreciate the food, where it came from, what went
Mhm.
into it. And you'll start to have all these little parts of your trip, like that meal or just sitting on a park bench, feeling the sun on your face, whatever. And you'll start to have all these little episodes of appreciation
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
add up and make you get so much more out of your trip.
Yep. Yeah. No, they start to snowball for sure.
Exactly.
And but no, that's very true. And I think there's always like, oh, you got to be doing something, even if you're not looking at your phone, you're listening to something. But when you're places like that, it's like, no, have a conversation with the owner, have a conversation with the locals because you'll learn so much. And a lot of the times they're interested because they're like, sometimes you may not look the same as them. They're like, okay, I wonder what this person's background is. And it's cool to learn stuff like that and start to connect with different people there.
Absolutely. I mean, that's why I travel is because I want to connect with people and learn about them and their way of life and what might I be able to incorporate into my life. Um, I don't usually try to get people to incorporate what I do into their lives, but in sharing, we're doing that in a way.
Mm-hmm.
But obviously not forcing it on someone,
Yeah.
but learning from each other, and that's such a big part of travel.
Yeah. I've learned a ton in the 40 minutes we've been talking. So 100% that's one of my favorite things about doing this is I had a guest on who talked about um, the public transportation system this week. I had a guest who talked about cruising. I've never been cruising, right? So I learned different things, and like that's a lot of my audience is when you first start to plan trips, when you first try to figure out like all the hesitations. What I think we talked about this, like what happens when I get over there and I don't know like what to get on, how to get somewhere, like if it's in a different language and I don't speak that language, like all of the things that hold people back from doing it versus so that's one of my favorite things is being able to interview people like yourself and others to then share your area of expertise and learn because yeah, I mean I did not know about the Antarctica thing and also the France castle. I think that's like those are two things now. It's like those are pretty cool. So I think one thing I'm curious, you've been a lot of cool places. Is there anywhere you have not been that you're planning to go to or you're really wanting to go to?
I've been to Tokyo, Japan,
Hmm.
but Japan is a country I'd love to see more of. Get into the countryside and the food, just really do a deep dive into the food over there. So Japan's definitely high on my list. Thailand's another country I'd like to explore more of.
Okay.
Um, Syria is a place that I wanted to go to, which
Mhm.
unfortunately is probably beyond
Yeah.
going to anymore, kind of like Ukraine, unfortunately. But that was a place that I had, watched some travel shows about and seen, and was like, wow, that looks amazing. But unfortunately, I think that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
Colombia was one that I wanted to go to, and I got to last year. So,
Oh, nice. Where'd you go
Uh,
in Colombia?
Kind of all over Cartagena, Bogota, Medellin, Cali, some of the countryside. It's a
Any
beautiful
places you
place.
any of those you'd highly recommend if you're going?
Let's see. Cartagena was real nice. It's on the northern coast there on the I think it's Caribbean. Um, and the countryside is real nice. Trying to think of the name, Pereira, which I think is
Okay.
the part of the coffee region.
Okay.
That's more countryside kind of thing. Yeah, it's a beautiful place.
That's awesome. Yeah, I have a buddy who worked there or who went down there for work and he loved it. And then Thailand we're excited for. In Japan, that's on our list for sure. It's so you've have you been anywhere besides Tokyo there?
No, just
Okay.
Tokyo. I have a quick tip for your listeners is I was looking for flights. I had just done a trip to India with a group, then
Okay.
Vietnam, and I was looking for flights back to Chicago. And one flight went through Tokyo to Chicago and had maybe a 3 hour layover. And I called the airline and I said, could I expand that layover to 4 or 5 days? And oftentimes they'll let you do that. And I've heard some will let you do that even upwards of a year. You could
Wow.
have
Okay.
a year layover. Depends on
What
the airline and everything. Excuse me.
I was gonna ask what airline was that?
That must have been an American partner, so
Okay.
probably with Japan Airlines. But yeah, so you can ask about that, or you can look at it as a multi-city flight. So I'm looking
Hmm.
for, flight from Saigon to Chicago, and I could say, okay, I want to go Saigon to Tokyo on these dates, and then 5 days later, I want to go Tokyo to Chicago.
Okay.
And, you might see a little bit of an increase in price, or you may have to call the airline to be able to do that. But that's a great way. What I'm getting to is that I pretty much had a free flight to Tokyo,
Yeah.
because it's just a
That's
layover.
yeah.
And
Well,
then I found a
record
cheap and inexpensive place to stay, and all I did was eat the whole time, which was
that's
fantastic.
That's awesome. Well, we are recording on Travel Tuesday, so the tips and tricks could be, we could spend a lot more time going down a rabbit hole, which I would love to, because words, miles, points, hacks, like that's in my wheelhouse, and spend a lot of time over Cyber Monday or Black Friday, Cyber Monday, and Travel Tuesday finding some deals for our upcoming trips. But appreciate you coming on, Ralph. This was extremely helpful. I learned a lot. I'm sure my listeners learned a lot. Where can they find you online? Are there any best social platforms, email list for upcoming trips? Any tips and tricks? Feel free to share those so they can, and
Yeah.
we'll make sure to share those in the podcast notes.
Yeah, appreciate it. So the main hub for everything I do is continentaldrifter.co. Everything's there from all the trips I have coming up this year and next, my blog posts and podcasts and YouTube channel. So I have a YouTube channel, youtube.com/Continental Drifter. Love it if people would check that out. A lot of my trips are up there and little snippets of trips, parts of trips that I've done. I've also got this new book, this series out called The Mindful and Intentional Traveler, that you can find that under books in my website. But I just bundled the three books that I wrote this year in the series into a 3-in-1 book bundle. So all three books, 100% of every book, is now in one book called The Mindful and Intentional Traveler. So you get all three books for one price.
Nice.
And they're puzzle books. They've got crossword puzzles, word searches, mazes, things like that. But also there are adult coloring pages, interesting travel quotes, and there's blank pages for journaling, but also gratitudes and affirmations. and they're meant to be something that people can just sit with on an airplane or waiting for a bus or something, but it keep you entertained, keep you thinking about travel, and always trying to bring you back to center through the
Yeah,
gratitudes and affirmations. So that makes a great gift for anyone that's a traveler in your life that might like that kind of a book. So that's something that I'm really promoting now and creating some speaking engagements around.
I love it. I might have to get that for my parents for Christmas. I feel like they would like that. They're starting to travel more and more.
I'll
So
send
that
you a link to it.
yeah, no, I appreciate it. Is there anywhere, I know we talked about a few locations before we wrap, besides Cuba, Antarctica, France, like countries that you really focus in on if listeners are looking to go to those countries that you'd suggest they reach out if they're specific?
Yeah, I mean, I do Portugal as well. Portugal is one of my favorite countries. So instead of like an all Portugal trip, I do a northern Portugal. So it's Porto and the Douro Valley.
Oh, nice.
Beautiful part of the country. Spain, I do northern Spain's Basque Country and Rioja.
Okay.
4 nights in San Sebastian, 4 nights in the Basque Country. Wonderful in Rioja region, the wine region. Um, I've got this France trip I mentioned to the castle. There's also India. I've got a Colors and Culture of India trip coming up next November. Armenia and the Republic of Georgia. Oftentimes people ask me what my favorite country is, and Georgia is way up on that list.
Okay.
Republic of Georgia. Fantastic. I do also do have a Lapland trip to Finnish and Swedish Lapland, plus an optional extension to Norway, Cuba, Antarctica. So those are the trips I have coming up this coming year, and I tend to repeat a lot of trips, but then I'll maybe take one or two out and I'll add some
Mhm.
new ones or bring some old ones back. So constantly trying to keep my interest in going back
Yeah.
to these places over and over again, but also to create new trips to keep my clients' interests. I've got all 5-star ratings on all my trips, are all 5-star ratings over 16 years. And I get about over 50% repeat rate from my clients. They come back over and over again. So that
That's
says a lot.
awesome. Yeah,
Yeah.
no, that does. And I mean, you brought on so much value. You're well traveled, you've been doing it a while and you know kind of the impact it makes. And that's really the goal here is to teach people what that impact is and get them to continue traveling more and more. So now I appreciate you coming on. If we went to the Douro Valley in Porto last year, and
Yep.
I can only imagine if you're going to the France castles and flying into Antarctica, what your trips look like. So that's awesome. I would highly suggest giving Ralph a follow and yeah, linking up with him because he will 5 stars over 16 years. That's impressive.
Yeah, and you can get a real good feel for my trips on my YouTube channel because I've got some overviews of the trips there. So if someone wanted to see what we're going to see, where we're going to stay, people we're going to meet, you get a real good feel for that on the YouTube
Awesome.
channel.
Good to know. All right. Well, we'll make sure to share those in the show notes. Listeners, appreciate you tuning in again this week. Feel free to share this with a friend, family member if you liked it, and go ahead and give us a 5-star review and follow. That helps us keep the show going and reaching more people. Tune in next week. Thanks so much. Thanks, Ralph. Appreciate it.